Hey, I just wanted to have my poster background just for this overview. So I know we were talking about discussing what gap we're trying to fill for our dissertation. So for me, my gap I'm really trying to fill is the use of resistance training and helping minimize the symptoms and improve symptoms of those with symptomatic peripheral arterial disease. So one of the reasons why I found this as a gap is the fact that there's a lot of research out there from various different types of resistance training, whether it's modalities or volume and intensities, and that they were generally benefiting PAD, but there was a heterogeneity. So when I saw the heterogeneity, meaning that some of them showed benefit, some of them didn't, that it'd be the question. I was like, well, was it because of certain movements? Was it because of certain intensities that certain studies that brought on that made it that listed enough of a stimulus to be able to make these improvements? What was it? So there was actually, so that brought me to intensities. So I was looking at various intensities, and actually one study only has compared light versus heavy resistance training for PAD to see if there was a benefit. And that study had half their participants randomly allocated to a light at 30% of their 1 rep max group for lower body, upper body resistance training, doing 3 sets of 8 repetitions each session. And then the other half of the participants randomly allocated into the heavy group, which required them to do the same 3 sets of 8. So the volume was the same, but they were having to do the resistance training at 80% of their 1 rep max. And we know from our curriculum and other textbooks, and also a lot in the literature, that when you're doing lighter loads for your muscular endurance, which is an important component for the endothelial function dysfunction that PAD has, you need to have high repetitions to elicit that necessary response. And the 3 sets of 8 for 30% versus 3 sets of 8 at 80% is not a fair comparison, because it is at a more realistic rep range and volume for heavy, 80% of their 1 rep max, but not for 30. So they actually showed that the 80% group had the most benefit in that group. But also in the literature, a lot of these patients that have PAD also have hypertension, diabetes, and the heavy resistance training requires a lot more mechanical tension and a lot more that there's been some long-term findings that develop that there's a potential for them developing increase in arterial stiffness, right, and other things that can be happening from doing nonstop, high frequency, heavy resistance training. And this, which is fine for us that are healthy, but these patients that are with peripheral arterial disease are already dealing with an increased arterial stiffness, metabolic disease, and things that may not be the best for them at this point. So I wanted to see that, hey, with the use of a internal objective measure like muscle oxygen saturation, I think we can really help bridge the gap between not knowing exactly what the best intensity range is, because we can actually look at a threshold of once this muscle oxygen saturation, the working muscle, decreases to a certain repeatable value based around their threshold of intermittent claudication, we can use that to actually guide how much volume they're getting based off of each intensity. And that's also an exploratory, because there's not a lot of specific PAD resistance training guidelines. ACSM has it pretty generalized. It's also good to have a light, moderate, and heavy group, like I have in this 3-arm study, to be able to see how many repetitions they can actually do, especially in their first week of resistance training at each of these intensities, and then what's their rate of progression and volume that they develop throughout this intervention. So that's the gap that I'm trying to do based off of the research. What I think I can add is some of these things. So which intensity best benefits the exercise tolerance and peripheral arterial disease measured by the incremental cycling test. That is the main purpose of my study of what I'm trying to add to the research. For the another thing of adding to the research I mentioned already was an exploratory analysis based off of how much volume can they do relatively to a threshold before experiencing claudication in the light, moderate, and heavy intensities of their 1 rep max for eliciting a certain response of muscle oxygen fatigue and depletion. So that is another thing I would look forward to, and really am excited to see how much volume based off of each intensity is optimal for these individuals. And that's not going to solve everything and identify everything. There needs to be research to build upon that. But that's what I think having an exploratory view could really benefit. So that is one of the 2 primary factors of what I'm trying to add to the research literature about this topic. But let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns in the response to this thread, and look forward to have some discussions